Hello and welcome to the Schools and Social Change session. I'm aware it has only literally just gone one, so we're likely to get some people clocking in over the next few minutes. But I'll make a start because we've got 45 minutes and a really interesting and deep topic to discuss. My name's Matt Larsen-Daw. I'm the Education Manager at WWF. And I'm really excited that I can be joined today by some guests for this session to form a bit of a panel. So we've got Alex Green from Ashton, we've got Hattie, one of our WWF-UK youth ambassadors, and we've got Henna from Purpose Climate Lab, and they'll all be saying a few words later on about some specific projects and perspectives. I'm just going to kick things off with a little bit of context. And that is firstly to explain what this session is going to explore. So we're looking at the role that schools can play in bringing about the positive social change that we all recognise is needed around climate change especially, but of course this could apply to other topics as well. We'll dive particularly into the activity that is underway to engage schools in COP26 and the lead up to it, and think about why that's important. And we'll look at how else schools can actually have a positive role to play other than education. So we always think about schools as being, where students receive their education and are maybe prepared for the world that awaits them when they leave school. But of course, schools are also businesses and sites and have connections with the community that go beyond what happens in the classroom. So hopefully that's not a terrible shock to you if you've joined this session. I know that Communicate has a cornucopia of delights on offer, and I'm really delighted that you've chosen to join us for this 45 minutes. So I'll just start by setting the scene a little bit more. So we have a unique moment in human history right now, as of course we're all aware as communicators in this field. And of course, young people are aware as well. And so we have a real situation at the moment where young people are calling out to be involved in some of the big conversations that are underway. And we can see that tangibly through the climate strikes movement and the other youth-led movements like XR Youth Solidarity, and also just through the conversations that we have with young people as part of our normal audience. And of course, we also know that young people are not in any way helpless in this, and they're taking the stage where it's not being given to them through these movements. One of the things that we have noticed as an organization that's focused on addressing the challenges around climate change and looking at the social changes that we need to bring about is that there might be a slight limitation in the way that young people's role is presented when it's talked about in the media, and often how we address it as campaigners and communicators. And that is partially because there is so much to celebrate about the role of young people in activism and in getting political attention and speaking to power. And of course, that whole side of things is incredibly important. And Greta Thunberg and Vanessa Nakate and other leading figures in the youth campaign movement have had a huge impact already in just raising the bar when it comes to what politicians feel they need to respond to and how they need to justify their actions. But what's sometimes lost is the more perhaps sort of slow burn ways that young people can be a positive force for change now and in their future and in the future. And education maybe provides us with a context where some of those opportunities can be explored as well. So young people's role as they move forward and look towards their career pathway, or the things that they might, the energy they might bring into innovation, and basically the ways that they can actually be a positive and constructive force shaping the future, as well as calling for the future to be shaped differently. So hopefully over the course of this session and with the three speakers that we have apart from me, we'll really dive into some of that. And I wanted to just throw in a quote from Lord Jim Knight, who's currently pushing a Education and Sustainable Citizenship bill across the House of Lords. And some of you may have seen that reported or even read the bill itself. But in his speech, when he was presenting the need for the reform in education that's required, he said some really insightful things. And one of the quotes I wanted to pick up on to kind of frame the debate today was, "Knowledge without skills and agency is not only inadequate, it can be destructive." So I thought that idea that actually this picture on the screen at the moment says "Teach the Future." There's sometimes quite a lot of focus on the need for young people to feel like they know, the true situation, and the frustration they feel if they know that there's a crisis, but they're not being taught that in schools, they're not being involved in the dialogue around it. But of course, it's equally important, more important, that as well as understanding the situation we're in, young people are given agency to change it. So one of the things that I'd like to dive into, before I go further, we're going to hear from Hattie, one of our youth ambassadors, later in a few minutes. I also have a short video that's been recorded by another of our youth ambassadors who couldn't join us in person. So I'm just going to give him the stage for a minute or so. This is Will, another of our youth ambassadors.
Climate change affects everyone, wherever you live, whatever you do, however much you have or don't have. So, we have to find a way to reach out to young people and mobilise them to get their voices heard and take action. I believe schools have a unique opportunity to do this as they reach the majority of children every day. So, what can schools do? Firstly, they can set a good example by taking action themselves. They should consider the impact of what they're doing every day on the planet and get the children to consider their actions and those of their friends and family too. For example, minimising plastic waste, considering energy usage, turning off lights, recycling more, using less paper, encouraging children to walk to school, and so on. Second, I believe schools have a unique obligation to educate children on the climate crisis. Climate change is the biggest threat to humanity that exists today, and if we don't take dramatic action now, today's young people will grow up with a very different climate, with social, political, and economic consequences too. Today's children are tomorrow's adults, but it is the voice of young people who will get those business, political, and country leaders to take action now before it's too late.
So thank you to Will there. So Will's a 14-year-old youth ambassador for WWF. That's his prepared statement for today. And hopefully that resonates with a number of you. It definitely resonates with what I have to say next to further frame the conversation, which is really just to think, as I mentioned, about how schools have this role to play that goes beyond what happens in the classroom. And there's definitely a discussion to be had around what does happen in the classroom, but sometimes that slightly takes over from seeing the potential for schools as communities. So this rather dry diagram on the screen is just a quick way, a thought piece really to emphasize that when we talk about a school, it's not just a machine for education. It is part of the community. It has direct links with the local community. It has employers and suppliers who are influenced by procurement policies. It tends to have quite an easy way of engaging local decision makers, whether that's just the local authority or the council, but can go up to the MP and beyond. It also has a biodiversity contribution. If you add up all of the just the state school grounds, just the government school grounds across the UK, it comes to, it basically equates to being the third biggest public estate. So when you're talking about biodiversity contribution, there's a huge amount that can be considered with what schools do and how they manage their grounds. It's a business that has a carbon, water, and energy footprint. And of course, everything that you do to address those aspects of how a school runs becomes visible to the school community. And that school community is young people and also staff, and then young people who go out to take what they learn, not just in the classroom, but from the way their school operates out into the world. So I think when we're talking about schools today, it really is in that context of them as part of society and as drivers of change in society. And at WWF, the education team sits not in our fundraising, not in our supporter services, but in our advocacy and campaigns department. And that's because we see a huge potential for schools and colleges to be drivers of individual action and also convening those into community action. And in this kind of very simple theory of change you can see on screen, that really is the starting point of influencing business, national government, and eventually bringing about changes that are significant globally. Okay, so one last framing point of that. In WWF, we're constantly trying to support schools and teachers to bring a whole school approach that reflects that idea of schools not just being machines for education, but having all of these links in with the community. So we talk to schools about embedding sustainability. So we talk less about climate action at WWF because sustainability would have been, if it was properly a value across society, would have prevented the climate crisis. It can prevent similar crises in the future, and it connects the climate crisis with the biodiversity crisis, with the plastics in the oceans crisis, and so on. It all comes down to understanding the principles of sustainability. So that's what we tend to talk about when we're embedding it in schools. But we ask that schools consider how they can bring it into the culture of the school, yes, into the curriculum, what's taught in classrooms across all subjects, but also the campus, how the school is actually run and how it operates, and then also what they can do to engage and link with the wider community. And actually these 4 C's, we talk about a 5th C if we're talking about secondary schools, which is to think now about careers, because schools have a role to play in equipping students to start thinking about their career path and to be prepared to consider what further training they might need, what opportunities they might take up, and actually having a sustainability understanding that you can bring into that frame is actually really, really important, and something which WWF is going to be working on a lot over the next few years with partners across society. So that's I guess the opportunity that exists when working with schools and thinking about them as part of campaigns for social change. I just wanted to say very quickly in sort of the last 3 minutes of my bit that there's also a responsibility, and I think that's been really emphasized over this week with the release of a report, which some of you may have seen, that nearly 60% of young people globally, in a huge survey of thousands and thousands of young people around the world, more than 10,000 young people aged 16 to 25, nearly 60% of them said they were either very worried or extremely worried, right up the top end of the scale when it came to thinking about the future in regards to climate change. 3/4 of them said they thought the future was frightening. Over half actually said they thought humanity was doomed, which is a really worrying statistic. Obviously, the idea that humanity is doomed is worrying, but the fact that more than half of young people who are going to be shaping the future think that is really worrying. So with WWF's approach to education and with what we sort of consider to be a really good practice across environmental education, you have to consider mental health at the same time as considering, understanding the issues and being equipped to take action. So we've been introducing, especially educators, to a set of principles that I think apply really to any communication or engagement of young people around the climate crisis. And we call it HEAR, HEAR, and it basically covers the 4 following principles. So the first one is hope. And I think this is something which a lot of organizations do try and build into their communications, but sometimes it can feel a little bit artificial. It can feel like you're giving a really urgent message about the change that's needed, and so hope can feel a little bit difficult to build in. But of course, there is cause for hope. The idea that our calls are answered and the action that we're calling for is taken is a path towards a possible positive future. And we don't want young people to feel there is no hope. And of course, hope is much more motivating than despair. Despair just fosters inaction because you think there's no point in doing anything. Whereas if you have hope that a better future is possible, that provides the energy to try and shape it and bring it about. The second is empathy, for the E. So that's just thinking about the particular circumstances of young people, and especially if you're a teacher in a classroom, you'd have to think about how that might be different across different members of your class. But obviously, if you're communicating and campaigning, you're going to potentially be reaching a lot of young people in different circumstances. Some may be prone to anxiety. You can put these hard-hitting messages out, and they can actually be genuinely terrifying and lead to some really negative impacts on young people. But also, they may have parents in the fossil fuel business. They might feel quite victimized by some of the messaging, or in the in the meat industry or the dairy industry. They might be meat eaters for their own reasons, and you might be going out with a message about how diets need to change. There might be cultural reasons. So it's really important that we don't focus on individual responsibility or blame. I know that's a principle of some of the big environmental movements at the moment, but with young people, it's especially important, where there's the danger that they can feel that there's a responsibility on them or blame on them, which of course has not been earned, and which can be quite negative. Can lead to feelings of guilt or shame, which are completely unearned. Then there's action, always building an action, so that you can make that hope that we've talked about at the top feel grounded in reality, but also counter feelings of helplessness. So make sure that schools and young people know that there is a way that they can take agency, and a way that they can actually be part of the solutions that you talk about. And then lastly, relevance. The issues can seem really far off. They are not far off. They're affecting all of us now, and they will affect all of us more in the future. But when you're talking about the melting of the ice caps and extreme weather events across the other side of the world, these things can seem a long way off. And therefore, your actions can maybe seem irrelevant. They can seem more like a sort of optional, charitable thing that you want to do because you care about issues, but they're not directly relevant to your own lives. So in communications, campaigns, and work with schools, we can really ensure that the relevance of these issues is driven home. And we've got a unique opportunity this year with COP happening, the climate conference happening on our doorstep in Glasgow, to be able to actually bring that conversation home, if you like, and it's going to be in the media, and the world leaders some of them are going to be here on our shores, and it does really feel like this is something which we're part of by living in the UK, and part of the solution. So that brings me just to mention what we are doing specifically around COP and why with schools. So WWF has been instrumental in bringing together a very large consortium of organizations to take a really joint approach in engaging schools, because schools, teachers are busy, and it's really important that with all of those wonderful opportunities that exist already for them to look at environmental issues and climate change, that if we want there to be one sort of unified story of schools taking action that they can look back on and feel they were part of, and also that can really resonate and bring a message to world leaders, the more schools that do the same thing, the better. So as a result, we've come together with organisations as well as Ashton that are here on the call. We've worked with the Fair Trade Foundation, the Soil Association, Christian Aid, obviously the Climate Coalition, and many others, to pull together a pack for schools that gives them things they can do to explore and learn about climate change in the classroom, and bring these issues, not only the science of climate change, but the social justice angle and so on, and bring it in such a way that students can see the big picture and can see the kind of system thinking approach that needs to be taken to finding solutions. And that's something which is so much easier when you're talking about world leaders coming together and discussing an action plan for change than if you just, for example, bring climate into your curriculum teaching of geography. So there's a huge opportunity there. We've also developed an activation for schools to try and bring it all together. And I'll just show a very short video, and I'll remember to mute myself this time, just to give you that framing. And then before I talk any more about the sort of content of the activity with schools, I'll invite Hattie straight off the back of this video to give a bit of a student perspective on why we should be engaging schools around COP. So just bear with me while I bring the video up. That's the wrong one. That's why. Sorry, this is very ad hoc. a little insight into my filing system. You're welcome. Okay.
A leaf on its own may seem small, but many leaves together allow trees to grow, forests to form, worlds of wildlife to thrive. That single leaf becomes powerful, a force for growth and for change. You can make change too, together with world leaders, to protect our planet. In November, world leaders will meet at COP26 in Glasgow to decide the next steps in tackling climate change. The decisions they take there will shape all our futures, including yours. Your voice matters. COP26 is an opportunity to get your voice heard. The world is warming up. Human actions are breaking the planet's natural balance that keeps us comfortable, healthy, and safe. People in poorer countries are affected most, even though they did the least to cause this crisis. Global warming impacts the future for all living things on Earth, including us. We need urgent change, and we need it to be fair. We all need to work together for our planet. World leaders, businesses, local communities, and people of all ages, including you and me, to create a sustainable future for everyone. Here's what you can do. Make a leaf. On one side, write your own promise to the planet. On the other side, write a promise you want world leaders to make. Then share your leaf with leaders at COP26 and with the world to say what you will commit to provide a solution for climate change and all our futures. Your leaf will join other people's leaves from across the world to create a global forest of promises. Promises we'll all keep to protect our precious planet. And we'll be watching world leaders and holding them to their promises too. It's our climate. It's our future. Let's protect it together.
So a little insight into the Forest of Promises activation there. I can say a little bit more about that a little bit later, but if it's possible, I will now hand over to Hattie to just say a few words from her perspective on the importance of engaging young people and schools in COP.
Hello everyone. Hi, my name's Hattie. Thank you, Matt, for introducing. I'm a young campaigner for the protection of the planet in its broadest sense, and it is pretty huge. And maybe that's perhaps why we're struggling with it. I'm a strong believer in the health and justice for all that will enable us to create a healthy future for not only nature, but for humanity as well. To create a healthy planet, we need action, and we need people who are willing to make those changes, however unpopular they are. I'm confident that due to the fact that young people will be the most impacted by climate change, it can and will be these same young people that will keep the profile high on the agenda within climate change. COP26 is quite possibly the most important point in history. When we look back at this moment in history, what will our children think? When science is provided us to tell us that the climate crisis can go either one of two ways, we have been warned. Make drastic change within business, within the walls of power and economies, or simply face these consequences. Those decision makers at COP26 have the world waiting on their agreements, and actions as failure at this stage is unmanageable. I like to hope it will be a changing moment in time when the planet over profit succeeds. It is such a pivotal moment for young people, and I really do feel it myself. Their lives and the future of our home is under threat, and it is so vital that you not only get to experience COP26 so that we can learn from it and prepare for the next conference of parties and the next and the next, but we also have things to say right now that need to be listened to. Young people are the most socially aware generation that the world has ever seen. And although my generation do get criticised for the amount of technology we use and rely on, it has actually helped us in this respect. It's fast and it's non-stop and it has no boundaries. You can't hide anything from it, and the most amazing thing about it is that everyone has a voice. We have learned communication skills that no one has ever expected us to, way younger than it's expected. We have a global awareness that means that young people can understand about global issues and problems such as climate and the ecological crisis. And from this, independent filmmakers and influencers have realized that their voice can be heard within the world in seconds. We are a part of a failing planet, and we can see it and we can hear it. I am 15, and people around my age had no part in the creation of the internet. We have been born with it, surrounding our everyday lives. Those making the decisions at COP26 weren't subjected to all of this information and data that we have been able to access from when they were children. It's too late to close the lid on all the negatives of the internet we've already seen. What's out there is likelihood of what's on and what is from respect of climate change. In the same way, we can't go back to the Victorian ideology of children should not be seen and should not be heard. Youth voice should be loud and clear at COP26 because it's personal and it matters to everybody. Everybody has their part to play in the reduction of emissions and biodiversity loss. Subjects and topics that are taught within school do become embedded within society as the norm, and we need to make sure that it is an expectation that we look after the planet and protect the environment for future generations. This shouldn't be a choice of whether you opt in or opt out of doing your bit, or a battle for those who are trying to highlight the human and economic costs. Schools led by the Department of Education should be trying to be making changes immediately across the whole spectrum of education, and I don't understand why it hasn't happened yet. It shouldn't be up to individual teachers or schools to try and do this on their own. It's becoming more apparent that they are choosing not to teach us this. What can be the reason for that? Thankfully, COP26 is going to be so high on the profile that it is most definitely going to be hard to ignore. And that's why I'm very much looking forward to seeing what comes out of this amazing conference and how we go into the next steps of the climate crisis with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hattie. That was beautiful. And I'm sure people are sort of being challenged by that, might have some thoughts. Please do pop questions that you'd like us to raise and discuss at the end, and Hattie will be part of that. If we've got, hopefully we'll have time. So pop those into the Q&A box. So thank you so much, Hattie. I'm just going to share my screen again briefly to introduce our next speaker, Alex. And it's really just to say this concept of the forest of promises that I introduced just before Hattie's speech there. This is a kind of really simple way that schools can kind of do something visual and engage the community in thinking about how individuals have a responsibility, but really we also need to be calling on world leaders to step up, which really speaks to what Hattie just said there. However, what we're hoping is that this, as well as being a moment for schools that they can look back on and feel that they were part of, there is a tangible change as a result of this engagement of schools around COP, and that is a legacy of local change. So harkening back to that idea of the whole school approach that I mentioned earlier, this idea that schools can actually make changes and it's worth them doing it more than it is, an individual household or a business because of its huge ripple effect. And one of the really key actions that we're asking schools to take as a result of thinking about these issues around COP is to sign up to the Let's Go Zero campaign. So I won't paraphrase it. I'm going to hand straight over to Alex, who can tell you a little bit more about that. Over to you, Alex, and let me know if you want me to take the slide down or if you would like me to leave it up.
Thanks a lot, Matt. You can take the slide down. That's fine. I'm sure we can sort of imagine what the lovely yellow of our slides looks like without seeing it while I talk. So my name is Alex Green. I'm here from climate solutions charity Ashton, and we run the Let's Go Zero campaign. I guess firstly to look at, so Matt's covered this a bit already, but why schools? Why do we work with schools, and what's that role that they have in communities, and why is that so fundamental? So today there are 10 million people in school across the UK. 9.5 million of those are students and about 500,000 are teachers. So that's a considerable number already. In fact, it's nearly 1 in 6 of our population are currently in school. Obviously, a few maybe isolating for COVID reasons. But then look at all the other people that are in schools, the people that cook the lunches, that test the boiler, who prepare all the resources, who maybe run the after school clubs. And then you look at all that reach into communities where the parents and the carers who are doing the school run, engaging with the work, helping with the homework, being there to be part of this school community. And in fact, 42% of households across the UK have school age or younger children in them. And in London, that's 50%. So there's a really significant reach by working with schools and through schools to get to that wider population. We all remember our schools. You close your eyes now, you can picture a classroom you were taught in, or a teacher that was particularly influential to you. So we are all inspired by it. And we actually, those of us who aren't related into schools at all, we have nothing to do with schools and education, we understand it. We can visualize it. We know what it's all about. So that's why there's a real link into schools and sort of wider societal change that we can get. And we know that actually schools don't have one of the very big impacts. They aren't one of the big carbon contributors. Although they do spend, schools in England alone spend £600 million a year on energy, which is, is a considerable amount. And they've got over 6,000 square kilometres of estates out there. So they do have a part to play, but we know that strategically it's not one of the big ones, really. So why do we work with them? Because we know that they have such a great influencer role. If a school makes a rule about whether you can have single-use plastic or individually wrapped things in your packed lunches, that immediately impacts what people are buying in the local shops. When schools make a rule about encouraging students to cycle to school or incentivizing more active travel, we know that affects what people do. And so there's all these opportunities there to make change that actually goes beyond the gates. And we know that schools have the potential to cut their carbon now on their sites and in the activities that has that immediate effect now. That will have that knock-on effect in communities and households and businesses because of that influencer role, that lovely nagging impact of kids. But actually, and probably more significantly, it helps us in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, when we are asking society to make really fundamental lifestyle changes, is actually we've got half a chance of having communities on board and understanding and seeing why and how they can do this. So all of that's why we started Let's Go Zero, and we launched it just under a year ago, and we're working with lots of organisations to make this campaign really thrive and be a real success. It's a campaign for any school across the UK to sign up to say they want to be zero carbon by 2030. It's about them showing their ambition, the direction they want to be moving in, where they want to be, and to show that they want to be part of a solution, and that they stand alongside their students to say that we know we've got to do something, we've got to take action. Schools sign up, they're saying three things. Firstly, they want to be zero carbon by 2030. Secondly, that they are taking some action now, no matter what that is. And for some schools, that's just the first steps. And some schools, it's everything and all the eco-bling that goes with it. But the third thing is they're saying is they want help to be able to do more. They want help from government, from local authorities, from other schools. They want to be able to do more than they're currently capable of doing. And we're absolutely delighted that the campaign is getting such brilliant support. There's a whole load of organisations, so many of them here today, that are backing the campaign and really supporting it. And we've got about 35 local authorities encouraging their schools to sign up. We've got the Church of England encouraging their schools, the National Education Union, and we've got a really great team at IKEA who are supporting us as well for this campaign. And it's just so exciting to see how it's growing. And it's working. We're demonstrating that demand. We've got over 400 schools already signed up. We've got the ear of the Department for Education. We're in there helping them develop their sustainability and climate change strategy. And we're just really excited about what's going to happen at COP, and what's going to come out of that, but what's going to go beyond COP as well. All those really exciting things that go beyond it. So now I'm going to pass you over to Henna, who's from the Purpose Climate Lab, and she's going to tell you a bit more about the Future Proof Ed project, which is fantastic, and we've been working with them loads. So over to you, Henna.
Great, thanks so much, Alex. I'm also conscious of time, so I had a whole spiel, but I will keep it brief so you've got time for questions. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about a project that we've been working on, part of the Purpose Climate Lab. And if you haven't heard of us, we are part of Purpose, which is an agency, and specifically our role and my role is to think about where we can test new approaches to the climate movement and to climate campaigning. And we were thinking about education more broadly, but also schools. And we came up with the stat. So a child starting school this September, please check my maths, will leave school in 2035. Now, in the UK, we've said that we will cut emissions to 78% of 1990 levels by 2035. And the transformation that we need to go through to make this a reality and equip young people for the change world is huge. Alex and Matt have already referred to it. It's going to be about the world of work, transport, how we eat. This is about education, but about so much more. And I was invited to speak a little bit about the campaign and kind of what the potential of education is to kind of lead this change. But I just wanted to share two brief observations as someone kind of around the movement and who's been campaigning for a little while. And I think the first observation for me is the real range of people and organisations already doing great work in this space. So in the past 40 minutes or so, we've heard about creative and inspiring advocacy that Matt's been talking about around COP, practical steps to make schools leading institutions in the transition, and also from Hattie around how we engage young people in COP and why it's so important. There is so much potential, vibrancy and diversity, I think, crucially, in the work that's happening and in schools as a place. And the second one, slightly cheating, is that as a campaigner who thinks about communication, about audiences, the range of audiences and voices that this diversity provides is huge, right? Students, teachers, school leaders, all of them have a story to tell and also a huge capacity to influence the climate transition. And in some cases, the climate movement has seized that opportunity. It's great to see young people like Hattie kind of talk about this and lead the way. But there is still, I think, a few key questions that we have to answer about how we incorporate schools into our strategy as a movement. For me, it's about how we ensure the voices of young people are a meaningful part of the conversation that we have around the transition. How do we make sure it's not just, young people leading marches and it stops there? And that's why it's great to see young people being brought to the table in conversations like this. And also how we work with teachers and school leaders to prepare the next generation and to also communicate what they need to people like the department. I think as campaigners and as communicators, we've done a great job at mobilising young people, but the question for me is sort of how far have we been able to advocate and win the policies that will make sure that we're there and we're actually prepared for the transition. So that was the starting point for the Future Proof Ed campaign. We wanted to communicate the challenge of the climate crisis to teachers and school leaders so that they were inspired to act and kind of advocate on this issue. And as you've seen from everyone here, they were way ahead of where we initially thought they were. But I think it'd be useful just to pull together some insights to understand kind of the gap between where teachers and people in schools are and actually what's happening. So when we surveyed teachers, over 40% of them said that climate change was rarely or never mentioned in their schools, even though the vast majority thought that climate education should be compulsory. And I know we're not just talking about what's taught here, but I think that that kind of gap between what teachers think should happen and what young people clearly want and what is actually happening is a huge one, and one where it's clear that as a movement we need to mobilise. And I think the other question here is, like, in the context of COVID and the context that we've been in so far, teachers in schools are more overstretched than they have ever been. They're centres of the community. They are supporting young people in loads of ways. How can we make their lives easier? So we decided that what schools need is support. And we said it was support with what to teach and how, support with making schools sustainable environments in places that lead the transition, and also support from policymakers so that they say, look, the transition in schools is a key priority for us, not only because students and teachers want it, but actually we need to prepare young people for a changed world, and they need to enter the world of work with a really different mindset to the one that we have now. And these three elements sort of have become the foundation of Future Proof Ed. We brought together unions, teachers, young people, employers, NGOs, and lots of other people under one sort of umbrella to share resources, frameworks, and also a little bit of best practice too. So, for example, Matt has done some brilliant work on resources and what teachers can teach. Obviously, Ashton and Alex are doing a great job with Let's Go Zero and leading the green transition. We've got networks at whole education and unions who are sort of sharing information and creating those relationships across the sector. And I think most effective from my point of view has been that we've been able to speak with one voice from all these points of view to people who make policy. And Matt mentioned Jim Knight earlier, and actually I've been working with him to sort of ask MPs to visit local schools to raise this issue with school leaders and teachers, and to start creating broader support for change and for the campaign to move on. I think the question for us now is sort of where next. And as someone whose job is movement building, which sounds quite highfalutin, but I think is really just bringing people who care about the same thing in one place, it's clear that bringing people together in the sector has kind of helped unlock a new and really exciting space for the climate movement, and a space that for me, and I think it was already referenced, brings ordinary people where they live into a conversation about what the future looks like, and how the climate crisis will affect their lives. And I think that really has to be the basis for us to move forward. And I think that means extending the conversations that we're having, speaking to employers, parents, institutions, and using schools and education as kind of the leading sustainability movement to kind of create that systems shift that we have to see. And I think it's a huge opportunity for us to build power, and we look forward to supporting the movement and kind of taking it forward in this space. I'm sure you've all got loads of questions, so I will stop and hand back over to Matt.
Thanks so much, Hannah. That's really useful reflections. So we've got, there's a question posed by Melissa, which is that what are the 3 key messages we think should be delivered to all schools? So what I thought was if we can all throw our thoughts in on that on the chat. I've already started doing mine. I think that would be the most useful way to use the time. And in the meantime, I'd much rather use these last few minutes to ask Hattie if she's happy to respond to Jen's question there, which is one of the challenges that facing schools. So it says, what is your opinion on the issue of how schools are judged on exam results, the focus on exam results, and therefore can find it difficult to fit in teaching outside the curriculum or exam syllabus, as the climate often is. So I wonder, Hattie, if you've got any experiences or reflections on that, and if not, feel free to bounce back.
Yeah. Okay, so my personal opinion with it is that yes, schools are highly judged on exam results, and that is what is seen on the paper. So that is what is viewed for the school in terms of how well it is with its education, or how good the teachers are, or how good the students or not good the students are. And that is really tricky when it comes to wanting to get young people outside and getting young people to experience the natural environment and get this deeper connection to the planet. One thing that I would say is that there are many ways in which the curriculum can be taught outside. There are lots of different ways in which teachers, just by doing a little bit more research, can understand on how they can actually link. I mean, an example I've just thought of with maths, the Fibonacci sequence. You can very much do that outside in nature, because the Fibonacci sequence is in so many aspects of our natural world. That can be taught at a GCSE level or a Key Stage 3 or under level from secondary school, outside and out of the classroom, which gives young people like a connection to the planet by doing curriculum-based work. But it is so important that it is the teachers who make the effort to get young people inspired and to get young people having this passion for the environment and for activism and this connection to the planet, because it is clear that the Department of Education is not doing this enough. So as students, we are relying on teachers to be able to do this. So yeah, I 100% understand, and I agree with the fact that schools are based a lot on what the results look like, but it is down to teachers to be able to understand and work out how that they can link their lessons outside into outside and into nature.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Hattie. And yeah, I 100% agree with your reflections there. WWF has this whole theory of change, of kind of what education really needs to bring, to have young people who feel empowered as well as motivated to bring change. And connection to nature is actually, it is fundamental, because if you don't have that, nothing else really lands as being, a strong incentive, or helping to understand the natural system. So I don't know if I'm waiting for Matt to pop up and tell us we're out of time, but he hasn't. So I'm just going to field another question. So we've got a couple here. So one of them, how can we get this onto a school's agenda when the school has other issues regarding Ofsted ratings and teachers and head teacher being more than busy? So I don't know if Alex, you'd like to respond to that?
Should I take that one? So what we're seeing actually is it is on a lot of their agendas, but they don't actually know what to do about it. So it's one of the many things, including COVID testing and attendance and all kinds of exciting challenges that head teachers face, that dealing with climate and climate anxiety and pressure from students is actually something they know they have to do, but they don't really know what to do yet. And that's why sort of starting down the road and taking action, being part of a campaign, can really support that, actually. And we are working directly in with Department for Education to see how it can link in with wider things without, nobody wants it to be Ofsted regulated. So what are the more creative ways that it can be something that schools are supported to do? But that is Matt now telling us that we're finished, I think.
I think that is our cue. So thank you so much to everyone who joined and for the reflections on the chat. And I hope there's been some useful thought processes stimulated there. A huge thank you to our speakers, Alex, Henna and Hattie, and to Will in his absence. And wish you all a really fantastic rest of the day at Communicate.